Okay, we're here today at Triumph HQ for the launch of the Speed Triple 1200 RS. This isn't just an incremental Euro 5 update. There's more capacity, loads more power, it's lighter, and as such, the power to weight ratio has gone up massively. There's better tech, and I have to say, it looks absolutely gorgeous as well. So in this video, we're gonna go through all of the details and specs, but I'm also lucky enough to be joined by Miles Perkins, Head of Brand Management, and Stuart Wood, the Chief Engineer here at Triumph, to go through this bike in every little detail. So stick around to the end of the video if you want to see those interviews. But before we get started, let's hear the bike. So let's jump into the specs with that new, larger engine. It's got a bigger bore to increase the capacity from 1050cc up to 1160, and as a result, it's the most powerful Speed Triple Triumph have ever made, and by some margin. The previous generation weighed in with 150 PS, but this new 1200 RS is capable of 180 at 10,750 RPM. Peak torque is also up by 8 Nm to 125, and as you can see from the dyno chart, there are pretty healthy gains across the board. Whilst the bore was increased from 79mm to 90, the stroke has become shorter, dropping from 71.4mm to 60.8, which goes some way to explain its ability to rev 650 RPM higher with a new redline of 11,150 RPM. But at the same time, Triumph have managed to shed 7 kilograms from the engine, and lighter internals mean reduced inertia, leading to a more responsive feel at the throttle. There are plenty of other tweaks inside, like new twin-tip spark plugs, finger follower actuated valves, a stacked gearbox, and an improved quick shifter which utilizes a position sensor carried over from their Moto 2 work. All of which are covered in more detail later in this video when I speak to Stuart, as he's clearly more qualified to tell you about them than I. You may well have already noted that the exhaust system has had a massive revision as well, with the previous generation's iconic twin underseat silencers gone in favour of an underslung unit that pops out on the right. This has been done to improve handling as the weight is held lower, and of course it's compliant with Euro 5 emissions regulations too. There's also an exhaust control valve, as you can see here, so there are a couple of routes for exhaust gases to exit the silencer, and the valve varies the distribution between the two in order to achieve the best possible engine performance. But Triumph say that despite all this going on, it's their best sounding Speed Triple ever, and after firing it up earlier, I'd have to agree. We were in a warehouse, granted, but it was surprisingly loud for a stock setup, and combined with the intake sound, it certainly has a bark to match its newfound bite. Now, I mentioned the improved power to weight ratio earlier, and that's not only down to the extra 30 PS of power. There have been weight savings in the chassis with a 17% lighter cast aluminium frame, and combined with the engine's weight savings, there's a 10 kilogram drop across the whole bike with a new wet weight of 198 kilograms. They say that this has led to a 25% improvement in power to weight, making it the fastest accelerating Speed Triple by far, and almost double the power to weight of the original 1994 model. So it's quick in a straight line, but they also sought to make a bike that was as nimble as its smaller sibling, the Street Triple. So as well as lightening it up, the weight has been moved forward and down with revisions to the frame, a more compact engine owing to the stacked gearbox, and the exhaust system as we've already mentioned. Tweaks to the riding position also help, with 13mm wider bars giving a more commanding arm position, whilst narrower foot pegs increase ground clearance without compromising on legroom. The seat has also been reworked with a new profile that ramps up towards the back to help the rider into a tuck. Seat height is ever so slightly up from 825 to 830mm. The Speed Triple 1200 RS retains the same top spec fully adjustable Öhlins suspension as its predecessor, with an NIX30 fork and a TTX36 shock, although they have been tuned for the new performance figures, weight and geometry. And a new lighter rear axle and cush drive drive, reduce unsprung weight at the rear, which should help with the shock's responsiveness. On the press briefing call, one journalist asked if they considered offering semi-active electronic suspension as per something like the Ducati Street Fighter V4S, but the response was that it would be pretty expensive, pushing the price, which we'll get onto later, up significantly, whilst customer research had shown that it wasn't really a major requirement for most punters. Braking is slightly updated on the previous gen with a pair of new Brembo Stylema calipers at the front and a single twin pot at the rear. The 320mm front discs are said to be lighter, whilst the Brembo MCS span and ratio adjustable lever is retained to allow the rider to dial in their exact preference. Metzler's higher spec road-approved tyres, the Racetech RRs, are fitted as standard, whilst Pirelli's Diablo Supercorsa SC2s are factory approved for track use should you have them fitted. Technologically, the previous version was bang up to date with cornering traction control and ABS, 5 riding modes, a 5-inch TFT dash, keyless ignition, cruise control, a lap timer and more, but there are still some decent updates here to keep the 1200 fresh. The dash is the same size, but it's physically new with an optically bonded construction for better clarity, and the operating system is new as well. Triumph say that the focus is on displaying just speed, revs and gear position clearly, which is definitely a good thing, as one of my few criticisms of the Street Triple RS and Tiger 900 is that revs can be difficult to interpret at a quick glance. This looks much clearer, and the screen layout can also adapt to allow more space for other information like rider aids and phone connectivity should you need it. Speaking of which, the My Triumph system is fitted as standard, allowing you to pair your phone with the dash along with a headset to open up navigation prompts, phone call and message handling, music management, and even the ability to control a GoPro as per other Triumphs with this kit. The IMU-enabled cornering traction control and ABS have been enhanced with better front wheel lift control and a new linked braking system that Triumph say improves stopping distances and stability under hard braking. That said, I know that not everyone is a fan of the bike doing stuff on your behalf, so I raised it with Stuart in his interview later in this video. 5 riding modes remain with rain, road, sport, track and rider configurable, all of which affect traction control, ABS and throttle response. Track is said to be enhanced in this new version with minimal intervention, whilst rain mode limits peak power to 100 PS and heightens the sensitivity of the safety features. Elsewhere in terms of tech, there's LED lighting all round with a new distinctive front end that echoes the recently updated Street Triple, although it looks slightly more aggressive, which I personally think suits this bigger bike well. And the rear end has been given a bit of flair too, with an M-shaped accent to the taillight. Indicators are also LED and self-cancelling too, whilst the LEDs in the switchgear have also been updated to bump brightness. Cruise control is retained, as is the keyless ignition and steering lock, although it now includes a keyless fuel filler cap as well. And there's also a lithium-ion battery fitted as standard, which is said to be 60% lighter than the lead-acid equivalent, which actually equates to a substantial amount of 2.3 kilograms. I'd love to hear what you make of the styling of this new Speed Triple in the comments below. From my perspective, it certainly still has most of the key Speed Triple features, although it's been sharpened up and modernized. I'm sure some people will miss the underseat silencers, but the rationale for moving it seems reasonable, and it does make the tail section look more svelte, making the bike visually butch with the majority of its heft at the front. The standard fit fly screen is gone, which certainly changes the front end, although there is an accessory available, whilst new bodywork elsewhere includes the carbon front mudguard, the belly pan, seat unit, and the removable seat cowl, which does come as standard. The wheel design is also new, and there are a couple of paint schemes on offer: sapphire black with red and silver graphics, or matte silver ice with black, silver and yellow graphics. I've seen a few comments on previous Triumph videos saying that the current colour schemes are a bit less exciting than Triumphs of yesteryear, but when I spoke to the Triumph team on the Trident launch, they said that what people say they like and what they actually buy are very different things. But again, I'd love to know what you make of them in the comments. My pick would certainly be the silver. Now for the price, £15,100, which is a significant bump up from the £13,600 of the previous generation Speed Triple RS of £1,500. So is that good value for money? Some of the specs are similar, like the suspension and brakes, but 30 PS is a huge increase in power, especially at a time when we're seeing manufacturers restricted by emissions requirements. It puts the bike into another category and almost starts touching the true super naked levels of power. And they've cut the weight too. BMW's S1000R looks relatively bargainous at about 12 grand, but you'd have to go for the Sport Edition to match some of the Speed Triple's spec, like cruise control, a quick shifter, extra riding modes and keyless ignition, and that's 14 grand. But it has less power at 165 peak and less torque too. There are loads of other options to consider in this large capacity naked market as well, like the KTM 1290 Super Duke, Yamaha's MT10, Honda's CB1000R, Aprilia's Tuono V4, Kawasaki's supercharged ZH2, and then the even more premium end like Ducati's Street Fighter V4 and V4S, or the £27,000 MV Agusta Brutale 1000RR. I won't get through comparing them all in this video, but clearly you need to do your research in this market before you pull the trigger, and the new Speed Triple looks like it almost certainly should be on your demo ride list. Interestingly, there'll only ever be this RS model. The more affordable, lower spec Speed Triple S is being dropped, so here's Miles Perkins, Head of Brand Management at Triumph, to explain why, followed by Stuart Wood, Chief Engineer, with some more of that technical detail.
You mentioned the Street Triple briefly there, and when that was launched recently, we had the RS first, and then we got subsequent models, so the R and the S. With this bike, we're just getting an RS and that's it. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the rationale for that.
Sure. So the thing that defines what we're going to do, or what the team are going to do, comes from conversations with customers about what they want.
Yeah.
And with a bike like the Speed Triple, which we've sold over 100,000 of these since '94, we've got a very large sort of paddock of people who know them and love them, but also the category is really big and there are lots of bikes in it. So there are a lot of people you can talk to say, well, what do you really want? And with this, with the 1200 RS, the answer to those conversations pretty much defined what this should be.
Right.
And really, most people are after that one pinnacle.
Yeah.
So it isn't really a category for lots of derivatives.
Yeah.
Not that we see. Things change over time,
yeah.
but it is a really important and successful world of motorcycling with a lot of people who are looking for the best. So for that reason, there's not an S and an R, because the demand, and what we see with our previous generations, the demand really is for that top spec model, and that's really what we've ended up with here.
So it's certainly not the first Speed Triple you've ever made. I wondered if you could give us a quick history of this model.
Absolutely. This is a very significant name for Triumph. For me, I think this personifies the sort of modern Hinckley Triumph, or sort of almost like the Triumph Bonneville, if you will. The Speed Triple started life in 1994. That, I think, is very well known as having started the category, the naked performance sports category. Had a reputation for being a hooligan, had that kind of muscular look.
Yeah.
In 2005, the first 1050cc Speed Triple was launched, and that, I think, really began what then has gone on to be, I think, really quite a modern icon in terms of roadsters and road performance bikes. That was the very first time a bike, certainly for Triumph, and I think in the category, was 100% designed for the road as a naked performance motorcycle. And I think actually even today, this is in a very small camp, even in the category it's in, of being designed just for the road, but incredibly capable on track, rather than being a fared sports bike derivative with the compromises you get from it. Now, that 1050, through the generations then, there's been about 10, depending on how you look at them, different Speed Triples up until 2018, and with what I would say would have been the pinnacle of that bloodline. This is that next big step. So this begins a new generation with quite a revolution in terms of all the things that make this just absolutely awesome. So for me, that bloodline goes from 94 to this year with 10 or so, 11 updates, but 3 major steps, and this is the third.
So you said it kind of sets a new benchmark for the Speed Triple line. I guess what's the kind of key features that make you say that, I suppose?
Everything. So yes, it's got the speed triples character and DNA, and in many ways, actually, I think the tightness and the form and the look of this and the attitude of it goes back to that 1050, but with the tail being a lot sharper and everything being sharper. But in terms of what makes it a great bike to ride, all of those dimensions, I think, have been transformed here. Yeah. So you've got an engine that's gone from 150 PS to 180. But that isn't just 30 PS on top. That's actually, if you've seen the torque curves and the power curves, the power lifts from the mid-range all the way up. The triple's always been about its torque and how you open that throttle up, and it gives you that sort of wall of rich acceleration and the torque. That's up 8 newton meters, but again, that's up from the mid-range all the way through. So in terms of the power and performance, it's up, but it also revs higher. It's got a more sprightly throttle because of a lower inertia engine, and the engine is lighter. And in terms of the ride and the handling, that's transformed very much from the brief. And I was lucky enough to be seeing the development of this over the last couple of years, and the ambition to deliver something that handles like a street triple rather than the previous speed triple is what this has been about. It's slimmer, it's narrower, the geometry is completely new. It's an all-new frame, so the frame's lighter. And what you've got is the mass centralisation has put the engine forward and lower. The pegs are brought in. The seat is completely new, and it's got a new sort of raised seat designed to it, which allow you to tuck in a little bit more, but actually it's also more comfortable. So the handling and the engine and performance are a major step up. And then you've got the technology that goes with that. So optimised cornering ABS and traction control, completely new operating system and TFT instrument system. So everything.
One of the things you talked about in the improvements to the engine was that reduction in inertia. And it's something we've seen across quite a few of the bikes. In my memory, there was the Thruxton RS, Bobber TFC. But the first time we heard about that kind of idea was the Street Triple RS launch, where you talked about it trickling down from Moto2 and the Moto2 Daytona. So is that some of the Moto2 influence in this bike, and how do you achieve that reduced inertia?
The thing about inertia is that you need some in the engine to get the tick over to be even. Now, there's a couple of things that come into this. Engine inertia allows you to have individual firing pulses and keeps a smooth speed. Okay, so it stores energy and releases energy and keeps it smooth. We put a lot of effort into combustion and combustion stability. And that's something that helps give us a very clean and very efficient engine. Now, as we improve further and further things like combustion stability, we need less inertia.
Right, okay.
Okay, we've got ride-by-wire throttle. You can use the ride-by-wire, you can control the engine speed more closely with the ride-by-wire throttle. Right. So again, it allows the opportunity to reduce inertia, which is always good for acceleration and response.
So what would the kind of customer or the rider notice if they rode the previous Speed Triple back-to-back with this one then?
This would feel sharper. The throttle response would be sharper. Throttle blips would be sharper. It would just be a much more alive engine.
And one of the other features that you talked about trickling down from Moto2 was the upgraded shift assist that now has a position sensor. Can you describe a little bit about how that works and what effect that has for the rider as well?
Previous generation, we already had a fairly complex shift assist system, but now we've upgraded the sensor on the gear change pedal so that now gives you the actual force that you're applying to the pedal rather than just a switch point. What that allows us to do is then when we're mapping the gear shift, because it's a very complex map for changing gear now, because you're having to control the throttle to blip the throttle on downshifts, and that blip has got a duration and an amount of throttle opening. And that's dependent on where you are in the rev range and how wide open the throttle was or how closed it was when you started the downshift. So we're measuring pedal position or pedal force, and we're measuring gear change mechanism position. Very, very complex interactions, but for the rider, it just means the smoothest shift, up or down, without the clutch, no matter what throttle opening, no matter what engine speed.
And you've also made changes to the gearbox as well, so it's a stacked gearbox now. Again, I'd love to hear more about what that actually means in terms of how it's built, and does that also contribute to cleaner shifts?
Well, the stacked gearbox is about packaging. What you have to consider with a motorcycle is that it's a complete package. We talk about the engine, we talk about the chassis, but everything's so interrelated. It's absolutely interrelated. So one of the things we wanted to achieve was a more centralised mass package. We also wanted a lighter motorcycle. Designing a stacked gearbox has allowed us to make the engine shorter than the previous engine, which helps to reduce mass. It's also allowed us to package more components in the central area of the bike so they can be moved from the peripheries of the bike towards the centre. So that aids handling. So it's something that's very definitely an engine design job, but the main benefit is, well, it's engine mass, which is whole bike mass, but it's chassis handling.
And is another design consideration like that the exhaust placement? Because that was really iconic on the previous gen, the big two silencers sticking out either side of the tail section there, but now we've got something down on the right-hand side here.
Absolutely, that's the reason. The bike is an evolution, and as Miles said yesterday, it's actually a revolution. This is every nut, bolt and washer changed.
Right.
It's a new motorbike, new engine, new chassis. But that focus on reduced mass and mass centralisation has meant this evolution has taken us to the silencer in the centre of the bike. It's perfect position, and it's really helped with that target. The one thing that it hasn't changed is the character and the sound and that wonderful roar that you get from the exhaust.
Yeah. In terms of the sound, you've also fitted the exhaust valve as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that affects, is that a performance thing or an efficiency thing?
It's a performance thing in that it allows you to tune for higher torque at the low RPM, and it allows you to free up the flow at high RPM. So obviously the bike has to be completely compliant with all the regulations, and it is. Within those regulations, you tune to the absolute maximum to deliver the best possible performance.
So it's at a certain level of revs that valve switches.
Correct. It doesn't switch. It's a gradual opening.
Okay, interesting.
And we have the ability to control that in quite a complex way. Right. But as it happens, we can open it just between 2 RPM points.
So it makes me think, I was riding earlier last year, the Africa Twin, which has a similar setup on that exhaust, and there's quite a different exhaust note down lower in the revs. It's quite pulsing, they say, and then it opens up with a bit more of a roar. Is there a difference in sound, or have you got a fairly consistent sound across the rev range?
I think it's fairly consistent,
right.
And partly because of that gradual opening as well. It helps to smooth any transition that there is, but it's just glorious. It does need to be seamless. The intake sound is equally a focus on the bike.
Yeah.
So we put a lot of effort into making the most of what you hear there, because it really is evocative.
We spoke as well about the fact that there's no accessory exhaust for this, not just this bike, but also the Trident, which we saw launched recently as well. Can you give a bit of background around the reasoning for that as well?
Okay, well, I mentioned about homologation.
Yeah.
We wouldn't supply an exhaust as an accessory if it didn't comply with homologation. We want to maximise the potential of this bike for the customer in standard tune, so there's no more performance to be bought with an accessory exhaust.
Right.
So we've optimised the exhaust, the OE exhaust, for the bike.
And essentially there's no additional value to the customer, basically, in
That's correct.
fitting something.
Yeah.
There was a couple of other engine changes that I noticed as well. So this new model is twin spark?
It's not twin spark plug, it's a twin-tipped spark plug.
Right, okay.
Okay, that just allows you to get more spark energy into the charge for combustion initiation.
Right, and then also a change to finger followers as well from buckets on the last version, you said. Again, if you could give a bit of detail around that and some of the kind of information about the effects on the performance.
One of the things that's fundamental to making performance is obviously getting air into and out of the cylinder, through the cylinder head and into the combustion chamber. We've increased the bore.
Right.
And reduce the stroke, but overall increase the capacity of the engine.
Yeah.
So that's a big reason for giving the extra performance we've got. We've increased compression ratio. We've also increased combustion pressures. Okay, so we've designed this engine to take more combustion load. Okay.
Right.
Now, we fundamentally need to get air into and out of the cylinder head or the combustion chamber. And the way to do that, to create a very clean and efficient engine, is to open and close the valves as quickly as you can with minimising the valve overlap, so you don't get unburnt hydrocarbons going through into your exhaust and then have to clean them up with a catalyst.
Right.
To do that, you want the lightest possible valve train.
Okay.
And the finger followers allow you to remove the buckets, allow you to reduce the mass of that valve train to, again, optimize all the opening and closing performance of the valves.
Since we've seen the introduction of the T-plane crank in the Tiger 900 last year, people are always speculating, when will it make it into a road bike, or they think it might make it into this bike when the rumours were going around. You haven't done that. What's the reasoning behind keeping that as a kind of Tiger thing?
The reason for the T-plane crank was a particular characteristic of riding an adventure bike, which is the amount of low speed, medium speed or off-road that you might do.
Yeah.
And we found that the T-plane crank was a really good feature. It did encourage you to use the engine at low RPM and wider open throttle.
Yeah.
And that is conducive to better control riding off-road. So it really, really works for the Tiger. And I wouldn't have it any other way on the Tiger.
Right, yeah.
Ridden them back to back subsequently, and you wonder why we haven't always done that.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah.
Now, with the Speed Triple, you're going to want to use this in the mid-range. Yes, that character would be lovely there, but you're also going to want to rev it right the way through the mid-range and to the top end. And the refinement of the 120-degree crank, in this case, makes it a better option for Speed Triple.
Another feature that kind of stood out to me was the linked brakes. And it's something that in the comments on my videos I've noticed sort of seems to divide people. Whether they've ridden a bike with it or not, they certainly have an opinion. And it's one of those things where control being taken away from the rider in terms of the manual sort of operation of the bike, some people aren't that comfortable with that. So I guess what's the reasoning for fitting it, and what's the benefit on the road?
Okay. I agree with anyone who would say that. Personally, I don't want to feel that intervention.
Right.
And that's what we've achieved. All of our electronics is there in the background to help you if you need it. You shouldn't feel the intervention. So what we're doing is applying a small amount of rear brake when you apply the front brake, which helps stabilise the bike. It also helps us with our algorithms, control algorithms for the braking, that gives you a shorter stopping distance. Okay, so there's good technical reasons, but it's not something that's intrusive. There have been linked brake systems, mechanically linked brake systems in the past that have been at best clumsy and at worst quite intrusive. This is nothing like that. This is an added piece of technology, just like the corner-optimised ABS or traction control that you don't know is there until you realise you're riding on the limit and the bike's looking after you.
Well, we focused quite a lot on the details there. I guess I want to just wrap up with maybe your key takeaways and what are the big things people will notice about riding this bike? The
first thing is that we've lost none of the character, none of the attitude of the Speed Triple. The Speed Triple's been with us for a long, long time, since 1994, and it's evolved all the way through. So it's a bike that people really love.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to lose that. So all of that is there. We've just added more. So we've added more performance, sharper, more aggressive looks, more refined, but more aggressive, which is a really good trick, and better handling. So it's more agile, it's more precise, all from the lighter weight and extra performance. Absolutely more of everything.
Brilliant. No, thanks very much.
So that's a comprehensive look at the new Speed Triple 1200 RS, and on first impressions, it looks pretty damn good. But as always, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Is 180 horsepower enough to compete in this market? And what about that price? Let me know what you think down below. Hopefully it won't be long before I can take one for a spin and make a review, as they're due in dealers at some point in March. So if you want to see that video as soon as it goes live, please do subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you next time.